Have you ever noticed how, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when the light starts to lean across the floor, and the world outside seems to settle into a hushed, expectant pause, a strange kind of heaviness can start to set in? It's a moment where the chores are mostly done. The emails have stopped for a while, and there is nothing strictly left on your list to attend to. Yet instead of feeling the deep relief you've been looking forward to all week, you might find yourself feeling a subtle, buzzing restlessness. That is hard to put a description to. Welcome to this quiet space where we are going to spend some time reflecting on a feeling that many of us carry but rarely have a name for. A gentle but persistent unease that some people have come to call the Sunday Neurosis. This isn't a medical term or a formal diagnosis, but rather a soft, observational phrase used to describe that peculiar gap between the busy motion of the week and the stillness of unstructured time. A space where free time doesn't always feel like freedom, and where the absence of a task can sometimes feel more like a weight than a gift. This is where the unease begins, in those wide-open hours, where the scaffolding of our schedules temporarily falls away, and we are left with nothing but ourselves and the silence. It's an interesting thing to consider that the very stillness we crave during a hectic Tuesday afternoon can become a source of discomfort. When it finally arrives on a Sunday, we often imagine relaxation as a destination we'll eventually reach, a peaceful meadow at the end of a long climb. But when we finally step into that meadow, we might find that the quiet is actually quite loud. It's as if the noise of our busy lives has been masking a hum of uncertainty that only becomes audible when the volume of the world is turned down. Many people notice that their sense of self is deeply tied to their productivity, to their roles as workers, parents, students, or problem solvers. And when those roles are paused for a day, it can feel like losing one's footing. It's as if we've spent so long running that when we finally stand still, the ground feels like it's still moving beneath us, creating a kind of motion sickness of the spirit. Here is what empty time quietly exposes: the reality that many of us have become more comfortable with the stress we know than the stillness we don't. We live in a culture that values motion over almost everything else, a world that celebrates the hustle and the constant stream of achievement. So it is only natural that when that stream dries up for a few hours, we might feel a little bit stranded. It's almost as if we've forgotten how to just exist without a specific purpose. And that lack of a goal can feel less like a break and more like a void. You might find yourself pacing through the house, opening and closing the fridge without being hungry, or picking up your phone to scroll through a feed you've already seen a dozen times, just to feel like you're doing something, anything, to fill the space. This is a common experience, a quiet reaching for distraction, because the alternative, sitting in the pure, unadorned present, feels strangely vulnerable. Some feel a sense of guilt during these hours, as if resting is a failure or a waste of precious time that should be spent on something meaningful, even if they aren't quite sure what that meaningful thing is supposed to be. There is this modern pressure to have a perfect weekend, to curate a series of moments that are restorative and productive, and socially fulfilling all at once. And the weight of that expectation can turn a simple Sunday into a performance. When we don't feel sufficiently restored, or when our free time feels mundane, we might feel like we've failed at the art of living, which only adds another layer of tension to the very hours that were meant to dissolve it. Some notice this feeling peaks as the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, during that golden hour that should be beautiful but often feels like a countdown. The shadow of Monday begins to stretch over the present moment, and the anticipation of the responsibilities to come starts to crowd out the peace of what is. It's not necessarily a dread of the work itself, though for some it can be, but rather a reaction to the transition from being a person who just is to a person who must do. It's the anticipation of the armor we have to put back on, the roles we have to inhabit, and the pace we have to maintain. This transition can feel jarring, like being pulled out of a dream before you're ready to wake up. This is where the internal noise starts to pick up. The quiet questions about whether we are spending our days in the right way, or whether the routines we are about to restart are actually leading us toward a life that feels authentic to who we are. When we are busy, these questions are often drowned out by the sound of our own footsteps. by the notifications on our screens and the immediate demands of the hour. But in the silence of a Sunday afternoon, they tend to find their voice. It's important to remember that feeling this way doesn't mean you are broken, or ungrateful, or incapable of relaxing. It doesn't mean you have a condition that needs to be fixed, or a mindset that needs to be shifted. It might simply be that you are experiencing the natural friction of a human heart trying to find its rhythm in a culture that never stops beating. We are often taught that time is a resource to be managed, a commodity to be spent or invested wisely. And when we view our hours through that lens, a quiet afternoon can feel like a bank account slowly draining away, without a return on investment. But what if free time isn't a resource to be optimized, but a space to be inhabited? Some people find that the restlessness they feel is actually a sign of life, a reminder that there is a part of them that exists outside of their utility to the world. It's a moment where the internal world gets a chance to breathe, even if that first breath feels a little shaky and uncertain. You might notice that the more you try to force yourself to relax, the more elusive that feeling becomes. It's like trying to fall asleep by focusing on how much you need to sleep. The very effort of trying keeps the mind in a state of alert. Instead, many people find that simply acknowledging the unease, letting it sit there in the room like an uninvited but harmless guest, can take some of its power away. It's okay if your Sunday doesn't look like a postcard of serenity. It's okay if you feel a little lost in the unstructured hours. And it's even okay if you find yourself looking forward to the start of the week, just so you can have the comfort of a schedule again. This restlessness isn't a flaw in your character. It is a reflection of how deeply we've been conditioned to equate motion with meaning. We've become so used to the background radiation of modern life, the constant stream of information, the expectations of others, and the internal pressure to be more, that the sudden absence of it can feel like a sensory deprivation chamber. Our minds, used to being fed a constant diet of tasks, can start to turn inward when the tasks run out. This is what the stillness is trying to tell us, that we are allowed to be unfinished. We don't have to be a project that is constantly being improved, or a machine that is constantly being tuned. We often feel like we have to earn our rest, that we have to reach a certain level of exhaustion before we're allowed to stop. But that mindset turns rest into a recovery period, rather than a natural state of being. And when we finally do stop, we're often so depleted that we don't know how to handle the sudden quiet. It can feel like stepping off a high-speed train and trying to walk normally on solid ground. Everything feels a bit slow, a bit distorted, and a bit strange for a while. But this feeling, this Sunday neurosis, can also be viewed as a bridge. It is the transition between two different ways of being in the world. It is the sound of the engine cooling down after a long journey. If you find yourself scrolling aimlessly or feeling that familiar knot in your stomach, as evening approaches, perhaps you can try to see it as a sign that you are simply transitioning, that your system is recalibrating to a different frequency. It doesn't need to be solved, and you don't need a new routine to overcome it. Sometimes the most supportive thing we can do for ourselves is to just let the feeling be there without judging it or trying to turn it into a problem. As we move through these quiet hours together, we might realize that the anxiety of free time isn't actually about the time itself, but about the invitation to be present with ourselves, without the distraction of a goal. It is a tall order in a world that rarely asks us to do that. It's a rare thing to just be without a title, without a task, and without a plan. So if you're feeling that weight today, or if you know you'll feel it again next week, just know that you are in good company. Millions of people are sitting in that same quiet, feeling that same hum of uncertainty, wondering why the peace they were promised feels so much like pressure. You aren't failing at life, and you aren't incapable of joy. You are just a person living in a fast-moving world, trying to learn what it means to be still. Perhaps over time, the stillness will start to feel less like a void and more like a sanctuary. But even if it doesn't, it is enough to just be here, right now, in the middle of it all. The Sunday anxiety might just be the sound of the silence finally being heard, the echo of a life that is full and complex and deeply human. It is the sound of a heart that is used to beating for others, finally having a moment to beat for itself. As the day begins to fade and the new week starts to pull at your sleeve, Try to hold onto the idea that your worth isn't tied to how you spend these hours. You are enough when you are productive, but you are also enough when you are pacing the floor, or staring out the window, or feeling unsure of what to do next. You are enough even when you are doing absolutely nothing at all. Let the light change, let the clock tick, and let yourself just be exactly as you are. The stillness isn't something to be mastered. It's just something to be lived in, one quiet Sunday at a time. If this reflection resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being here.